Coming up right now, we have a couple of distinguished gentlemen in the studio, and we're very pleased to have them here to talk a little bit about the crime and law enforcement in our community. Our top two law enforcement officers, Sheriff Matt Saxton, good morning to you.
Good morning, Tim.
And Chief Jim Blocker, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Well, yesterday that trial concluded over in Kalamazoo. The 25-year-old mother convicted of torturing and killing her 4-year-old. The girl died on her birthday. We were just horrified by that.
It was a good outcome and a good verdict for a very unfortunate situation.
You know, it's you just wonder why anybody would do that sort of thing. Does that kind of crime have a big effect on your officers? Because they have to deal pretty closely with this.
You know, often our officers and deputies see a lot of things that you can't unsee, and they have to deal with that internally. We have to help them as agencies to deal with those type things. But especially when it involves children, it really affects officers quite a bit more usually than other incidents.
You know, in that case, the woman told detectives she admitted to beating the girl and some other things, and then later recanted and said she was afraid. I mean, I saw the detective. It was a female detective. You know, it didn't look all that menacing to me. When you get a suspect like that in custody and you have some pretty good inclinations that this or that might have happened, I mean, what's the approach? You try to get them to admit it by, maybe being their friend or staying on their side. I mean, I know you can't speculate because you weren't in the room, but what do you think as officers interrogating a suspect like that? How do you go about talking to them that first time?
Well, I think that today we have a lot of modern techniques in terms of how do we communicate with folks. You certainly try to get to know them. You try to personalize it. You try to even show some empathy towards maybe their perspective on things, which I know may seem really difficult to do as an investigator speaking to a potential suspect. But certainly gone are the days in the imagination of Hollywood where it's a phone book and a bright light in a dark room. That does not exist. But I think as these interviews progress, I think the skill set of some of our investigators today, I think, is really creative.
What I get is that in this modern day, there's more psychology in the training of officers. They try to get in their head and figure it out.
A little bit of psychology, a little bit of salesmanship involved.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly. But, I think what you brought up earlier, too, is that think about officers' response on a daily basis. They respond daily to sometimes a person's most critical incident that they may have in their entire lifetime. They do that daily, time and time again. And I think, as Matt said, sometimes there's things you can't unsee, and so our responsibility to be able to actively respond to those challenges. And I'm not so sure we're there yet. We've internally, both with my department, I know Matt's had the same challenges, is we're all trying to figure out how do we work with our officers and help them get through these tough days.
Now, in this particular case, may not be completely done now. There are reports that people want to investigate why this wasn't reported earlier. What did people know about what this girl was going through earlier that might have, prevented her death? As a law enforcement leaders, do you look at that as, somebody's got to be held accountable, or do you look at it more like let's figure out some programs we can put in place to maybe minimize that in the future and help people come forward?
Well, I think both of those things are important, but each individual investigation is different. So for them to be continuing on to look for other people that may had some culpability in the crime, our agencies would both do that as well. So it's not uncommon to continue looking into an incident.
And I guess it would depend on, particular case.
Involved.
Yeah, I mean, you may look at a case and it just may be, oh boy, I don't blame them for not coming forward. Or it may be a case of where, my goodness, they should have come forward. It's you may approach it differently case to case.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think also, Tim, that's an excellent segue into what we're talking about today, which is silent observer. We can't do our job without the community's support. Many of our major cases, it's because someone saw something and they said something. And I think that is critical for us to get out and communicate this morning, is the power and the influence behind the silent observer program.
I didn't realize Calhoun County had the first silent observer tip line supposedly in the world in 1970.
Right. We started the program in 1970. I've been involved with the program since the early 2000s. It's a program through the Battle Creek Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And this program that started right here in Battle Creek has been replicated around the world. And we have seen positive effects of this program locally here in Calhoun County since 1970.
But I bet it's come a long way from picking up the payphone down at the corner at the drugstore and calling. We've got a lot of technology now that I think you're seeing is a great tool for law enforcement. These smartphones and apps and being able to text and communicate in many different ways other than the old payphone. And if a person didn't have a dime in those days on them, they might not report a tip.
Well, and yes, we're seeing the use of technology increase. We can get text to tips, so you can text to silent observer. You can also text to 911 now if the need arises.
Wow. Let's cover all of that when we come back in just a minute and tell people about some of the ways. There's even an app. You might have even seen my tip because I downloaded the app and wanted to see how it works. So I put in a tip. I hope you guys, I don't get in trouble for putting a fake tip in.
No, it was great. Matter of fact, I got a text about your tip just last night where the lieutenant had no idea what it was, and I was going to bring that up. So there's a lot of different avenues in terms of how do you put in a tip anonymously.
We all want to minimize crime and feel safer in our neighborhoods, and now we're in a position where we can actually be a bigger part of that than ever. We'll tell you how in just a moment. We have Sheriff Matt Saxton and Chief Jim Blocker on WBCK. Sheriff Saxton and Chief Blocker here. We're talking about Silent Observer right now and ways that you can do it. Sheriff, you mentioned that you can text. You can text to crimes. That's 274-637. And then enter SOTIP. That's Silent Observer Tip, SOTIP. And then the message, and that'll get right to folks there. Or you can log on to crimereports.com. But the thing that I found intriguing was, and I'm thinking to myself when I knew I was going to talk to you guys today, I wonder if they got an app like that pothole app that the county has. Because you can download this app, and then put in a picture of your pothole and tell them where it is, and then they fix it. And, well, yeah, sure enough, you've got it for Androids and you got it for iPhones up there. So I called it, first I downloaded the app. It's free. Took about 2 seconds. And then I called it up, and what it'll do is, and then it'll know your location. So it'll show you any law enforcement agencies in the area, even schools. You can touch schools, and for instance, if you were at Western Michigan University, you could then send the tip directly to the Western Michigan University Public Safety Department. But I sent it to the Calhoun County Silent Observer. I sent a little tip, and you got it.
That's right. We did. Matter of fact, it came in late afternoon, early evening last night, and then it was really simple. The address was there, so we know exactly what the information you put in. And then here it was. The information was menacing-looking guys dressed like cops. And then further on, so thank you for that, Tim. I think that's more the sheriff that you must have been talking about. But again, and you know that you're testing this app just for this interview tomorrow. And so that just demonstrates how these apps do work. They are active, they're kinetic, they go right to us, and then we can respond to them.
And that app is Tip Submit Mobile.
tip submit. So if you just go to your store in your application store in your phone and put in tip submit, it'll find that. You get the free download. And if you see something happening and you want to report it, you can do it very quickly that way and anonymously. And that's the main thing about the Silent Observer program. It's always been anonymous, but if that tip leads to a conviction, there's some mechanism where you can actually get a reward.
Well, they receive a tipster ID when they put that tip in, whether it's by phone, text, or the app.
I see.
And that way, the tipster, when they're paid out, they don't come to the police. They go to the chamber to receive, work through the chamber to receive that check. And we pay up to $5,000 for information leading to the arrest and bind over of a felony suspect.
Up to $5,000. So, yeah, that's certainly incentive for people to do it. As if it wasn't enough incentive just to try and stop crime in our community. And
oftentimes, folks don't want to get involved. But for those folks that don't want to be involved, but want to help, they can do it anonymously through Silent Observer and help them keep our community safe.
What is the phone number for Silent Observer?
That phone number now is 269-964-3888. So it's 964-3888. And over the last year, we have put that number on all the patrol cars within Battle Creek area. So the county cars have it, city, Emmett, and that number is on the bumper of our patrol cars, and I believe it's the same location on the city PD cars.
And I imagine, just like anything else, to make the program as effective as possible, you're having to do some outreach effort in the community. And obviously, we're doing that today, but what about schools and civic organizations? What are you doing there?
Over the years, we've been out in front of the civic organizations. We started a program within the schools here in the Battle Creek area. It's the Fast 50 program, where students can provide anonymous information if there's a report of drugs, weapons, alcohol parties. We've been able to stop several parties from taking place with information gained through the Fast 50 program at schools, and we've also been able to stop some fights from taking place because of that information.
There are some new crime statistics out from the FBI. When we come back, I want to talk about that and on how they look nationally, how they apply to our community, if any new trends that you might be seeing in crime here in our area. We have Sheriff Saxton and Chief Blocker on in the studio with us today. And Chief, you said some new crime statistics have come out that you'd like to share with the audience.
Well, I think it works with the Silent Observer discussion because, again, we're good at what we do because the community is good at communicating with us. We are rarely witnesses to the crimes that are committed, so it takes the community and the trust and legitimacy that we have with them and that collaborative partnership to be able to work through a lot of the criminal issues that we have in our community and every community. And so over 3,000 times in 2014, 2015, Silent Observer was utilized, and I think that's important to note because when we look back at our statistics comparing 2010 all the way to last year, 2015, what we see across the board, violent crime is down, homicides down, robberies down, aggravated assaults are down, property crimes are down, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, arson, they're all down except one. One crime went up by 14%, and that was criminal sexual conduct or rape. And again, Matt and I were talking about that. And there's several ways to look at the numbers there. One of the things about criminal sexual conduct, it's one of the most underreported crimes out there. In law enforcement, we call that the dark figures of crime. In other words, we know that a third of all crimes committed we never really get to hear about. And that's the power behind Silent Observer. And I think that's an indicator when we look at these statistics, is because now that legitimacy and trust there, where we want people to call us, we want people to communicate with us, and we want to go after suspects. We want to go after the bad guys that are committing these atrocious crimes. And so when you put these numbers together and the opportunity that something like this program, Silent Observer, gives us, it gives us those avenues of approach to work with our community, to work and to support the vulnerable folks that are out there.
Do you think sexual crimes like that are just being reported more than they used to be because of the changes in attitude, or do you think there actually is more of that type of crime?
Well, I think it may be a little bit of both, but I really believe, though, it's mostly because we're creating more opportunities and more trust within our ability to actually work on that crime. I know the way we investigate criminal sexual conduct has completely changed. The fact that we have a new database system called CODIS that we can utilize to go after these serial rapists, if you will. I think technology, I think our capability of understanding the effects of trauma and how it impacts victims and their testimony, and how officers are becoming more sympathetic and empathetic and knowledgeable about the traumatic events that these incidents have in people. One, has caused us to be more patient. And in the process, we've slowed the process down, but we're certainly more thorough in the process.
And it's not just the law enforcement side. I think here in Calhoun County, we have so many community organizations that assist with those victims of sexual assault. We have sexual assault services. We have Safe Place. We have the victims unit in the prosecutor's office. So the treatment of the victim in these cases in Calhoun County is much better than it has been in the past, which I think allows victims to feel safe to come forward and report those crimes.
Sheriff Saxton, Chief Blocker, thanks again for sharing your time with us today on WBCK.